that's when it came to me. I could be a luchador, and I could combine my culture, my being a Mexicano and being a Latino, and still be a good guy, be a baby face, a hero. And I was like, man, if I'm going to do this, I need to really think big and create my own luchador mask, my own name, and have a cape and take everything from Mexican lucha libre and bring it to Iowa. So that's how Latin Thunder, the luchador, was born. My name is Juan Fourneau, born and raised in Muscatine, Iowa. My mom and dad are Jorge and Eva Fourneau from Piedras Negras in Eagle Pass, Texas, La Frontera. I'm a proud Mexican American from Muscatine, blue-collar worker, husband, father, proud dad, and Chicano and a luchador. Probably the biggest lesson from my family that we had, my siblings and I, is just to stay here in Muscatine. There's a line in The Godfather Part 3 where Andy Garcia says, I missed growing up around all my cousins. I missed my cousins. And I think that we missed our cousins. You know, all our family was in Eagle Pass and Piedras Negras, and we got a little piece of how wonderful that life was to have your family nearby when we would be on vacation there. But most of the time, the life was up here in Muscatine. And I think all of us stayed here in Muscatine. We made a life here because we wanted our kids to be around their cousins, to be around their aunts and uncles, you know, to be around their primos and primas. So that was important to us. And we never really talked about it, but as siblings, that's what we all chose to do, was to stay here in Muscatine and keep our roots here. You know, being a Latino, a Mexican American from Muscatine, it means a lot. We have a strong Hispanic community, and a lot of people might know, but a lot of people might know we've been here a long time. There's always been a good manufacturing base here and jobs. My dad came here because Roy Carver started Bandag, and Roy Carver didn't know color. He spoke many different languages, Spanish, German, English. He was an incredible engineer, an inventor, a great businessman. And he created Bandag and Carver Pump, and he hired a lot of Latinos, and my dad was one of them. My neighbor across the backyard, his dad came here to Muscatine to work for Carver Pump in the 50s, I believe. So, you know, we've always had a strong Hispanic community here, and Heinz, that's just, I drive by Heinz every day. It's another great place where a lot of Latinos have worked at over the years. The 50s and the 60s, the Mexican migrant workers, the Latinos from South Texas, from the Rio Grande Valley, they'd come up here and pick tomatoes in the fields as migrant workers. But little by little, every once in a while in the summer and the season, when they were done picking the crops, a lot of the families, the husbands and the wives said, you know what, I like this town. You know what, está muy tranquilo aquí, hay mucho trabajo. So they chose to plant their roots here, and they found jobs at Heinz and in Muscatine and H&I. So we've always had a vibrant Hispanic community. I've always tried to represent Muscatine and let people know that, you know, there's a lot of Latinos here and a lot of Hispanics. You know, my family struggles, I guess, how it shaped me as an artist and a creative person. The biggest thing is just simply to be grateful to be able to pursue it. You know, there's a lot of Latinos, a lot of Mexican men of my dad's generation, a lot of moms like my mom that they had to work, or they had to take care of the kids, or they had a language barrier, so they weren't able to pursue their creative passions. So I'm just grateful to be able to have been a luchador. You know, when I was a kid, I would go down to the local Y, I'd walk down 4 blocks from where I lived, and I'd go pump iron because I was a skinny kid and dreaming of being a pro wrestler. But I didn't have to worry about like having to work. I got a job when I was a teenager, but my dad wasn't like, hey, you have to get a job, or forget those weights. Why are you wasting time down there? You should get a job. I was fortunate to be able to pursue my creative pursuits, to be an athlete. And that's, I guess, the biggest thing, is just grateful for that. My dad could have been, you know, he worked at Bandag and he worked at the factory, but he was a smart guy. He loved to read books. He learned English very fast for a Mexican immigrant. And he knew that industry and business, but because he didn't have a high school diploma, because of the fact that he had to stay in that manufacturing job, he didn't have some of the opportunities other people had. So I'm just grateful. Okay. Probably the biggest generaciones are just my mom and dad. You know, coming up from leaving Eagle Pass and Piedras Negras and everything that they knew, they sacrificed a lot and paved the way. Because I think my dad knew down in Eagle Pass, there wasn't very many good jobs in Eagle Pass. So there wasn't many opportunities to begin with. And then not having a high school diploma, he had to quit school in 6th grade to get a job to help support his family. His dad died when he was only 2. So my dad didn't have no choice but to make money to help pay the bills, to help my abuelita, my grandma. And because he didn't have a high school diploma, he wasn't an American citizen yet, he had his green card, he knew he had limited options in Eagle Pass. But he saw that opportunity, and I see so many immigrants that do that, right? Like, they're strategic. He saw when he came to Muscatine and he got that job at Bandag, he's like, hey, this is a pretty decent job. And yeah, it's physical, and yeah, it's hard, but it's 40-hour weeks, and there's chances to make some overtime. And the city's pretty nice. And there's a few other Latinos here. Maybe we can make a home. And, you know, my dad passed away in 2013, but I think all of my siblings, my sister, my brothers, we know, like, my dad can truly rest in peace because he made that sacrifice for his family. And now, you know, there's a saying, he planted a tree and now his grandchildren are sitting in the shade because of it. And I think that that's what I think about, those sacrifices that he did. You know, he knows that he made those sacrifices for us so we could have a better life. I'm a big reader of Warren Buffett, and Charlie Munger's his business partner. And I've heard him say once, like, it's hard to get anything done in a generation. You know, that's true. Like, it's hard to get anything done in a generation. And I think what my dad did, what my mom and my dad did by coming up here to Muscatine and having a good job and creating the American dream, buying a home, you know, now their grandchildren have gone to college and have had more opportunities. It's hard to get anything done in a generation. I think what my dad did was probably 2 or 3 generations worth, the jumps that he did and created for us. Well, Latin Thunder was created in Boone, Iowa. So I went to wrestling school in 1994, and then I had my first match at the Sportatorium in Dallas, and then I became an independent wrestler. But I always wrestled as Latin Thunder Juan Fourneau, and I would carry a Mexican flag. And at a certain point, I became a heel, a bad guy, a rudo, you know, a villain in wrestling. And I would wave the Mexican flag, and I would talk trash, you know, because that's what you do in pro wrestling. I would get on the mic and say, you know, yo estoy aquí para enseñar a toda la gente que el estilo lucha libre mexicano es mucho más mejor que el estilo lucha libre americano. And I would say, oh, but I forgot. You guys only speak 1 language, not 2 like me. And I would talk about how our people were working hard in the fields and doing the work that their grandchildren used to do, all to just get heat, what we call in pro wrestling, to get them to boo me and to chant USA, USA, and boo me in the Mexican flag, because I was trying to be a villain, a bad guy. I was doing my job. So there I was in Boone, Iowa wrestling, and I was getting heat. The crowd was booing me and booing the Mexican flag. But I wasn't 26 years old anymore. I wasn't 28 years old just trying to get heat. At that point, I was a dad, and my kids were there. And I looked out in the audience as they were chanting USA, 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 and I saw a Hispanic family in the audience in Boone, Iowa. There was just a mom and a dad with their son and their daughter, and they felt out of place, and it was awkward for them because they were surrounded by people that were booing me and the Mexican flag and chanting USA. And like I said, I wasn't a kid anymore. Now I was a dad, and I was like, in that moment, because that's what you do as a performer, you're watching your audience, you're listening, are they reacting? That's what I was doing. I saw them, and I was like, well, this isn't cool. This isn't fun anymore. And maybe there's more to life than just getting heat. So I finished that match, and I just remember thinking, well, something's got to change, you know? And I finished those county fair shows for Troy Peterson and IPW. And that fall, I was thinking, man, what am I going to do? I still want to wrestle. I'm still in shape. I still love wrestling. I think I can still do this another 10 more years. But I don't want to be that bad guy no more. And I don't want to make that Hispanic family feel awkward. I don't want that to happen again because I'm a dad. And that's when I came to me. I could be a luchador, and I could combine my culture, my being a Mexicano and being a Latino, and still be a good guy, be a baby face, a hero. And I was like, man, if I'm going to do this, I need to really think big and create my own luchador mask, my own name, and have a cape and take everything from Mexican lucha libre and bring it to Iowa. So that's how Latin Thunder, the luchador, was born. So that one's a tough one for me. Latin Thunder and Lucha Libre is artistic. I think Lucha Libre and pro wrestling is very artistic. It's creative, You got the capes and the masks, and there's got to be some showmanship. And in pro wrestling, that's a big part of it. It's not just the athletics and the moves, it's the art and the showmanship. And as far as, education and advocacy, I think I do that from another side. I go to libraries now. I don't really get in the ring and wrestle much anymore. I'm 52 years old, and getting in the ring with a fired up, in shape 25-year-old wrestler that trained at Black and Brave, that's hard. And my 52-year-old body can't handle that anymore. So now I go to libraries and I read stories to children and teach them a little bit about Mexican culture and what lucha libre is. And they get to hear a cool story, and they get to see that someone that just looks to them like a superhero. And they find out a little bit about, well, that's a luchador, and that's part of our culture. And I was at a library yesterday in Iowa City, and we had a story time reading, and it was great. But we had also like 3 kids who were Latinos showed up, and they were wearing masks, and they had capes. One was Místico, and the other one was Blue Demon, and another one was El Santo. They came to watch me tell the story and to read the book, but that was cool to see them excited about lucha libre and to show up dressed up like that. That was just cool to combine the worlds of lucha libre, my love of libraries and reading and education. I like to combine them all, because we can't just be one person, right? You can't just be an athlete or a blue collar worker or a small town person. You can be an artist, you can be an athlete, you can be educated, you can read, you can teach yourself, you can be a business person too. So I like to combine those things and explore other parts of my personality. So what keeps me showing up to continue to work, to continue to perform and do library events, to wrestle occasionally, to do artistic events? The thing that keeps me going is, when you're young, you think it's just going to be one big break, like one match, one opponent. Meeting the right promoter is going to change everything. And it takes a while. It took me a really long time to figure out that that's not how great things happen. It takes time. And it's just doing the work. I read a book called The War of Art by Stephen Pressfield, and he talks about that a lot. Like, what you want to create as an artist is almost like an attorney. They call it a practice for a reason. It's a practice. You show up not just one day, and you don't just show up when you feel like it. There's a lot of things, for the young people out there, there's nothing in the world I wanted to do more than pro wrestling. But there's a secret. Sometimes when I was on my way to a wrestling show, I didn't want to go. I woke up that morning and I didn't really feel like going. And it's okay to sometimes say, well, today I'm going to be blue collar worker. Today I'm going to treat it like a job, but I'm going to be a professional. I'm still going to show up in shape. I'm still going to give that audience everything that they have, everything that I have. I'm still going to put in that effort and that professionalism. So there are some days, 80% of the time, where I can't wait to go to the wrestling show or the library event or to perform or to go to a museum and be Latin Thunder. But there are times that you might not feel like it. But those are the times you just keep doing it. And year after year, I've been Latin Thunder, the luchador, now since I was 40, so for 12 years. And when I made up my mind and said, I'm going to do this every month, every week, even if I don't feel like it, that changed everything. To create a body of work, that was really the key that gave me some success. So it isn't just meeting that one promoter, having that one match. That's not really what's going to make or break you. It's that body of work and showing up every day. That one's tough, because it kind of goes to the previous answer of a body of work. I've had lots of powerful moments where I created Latin Thunder in Boone, Iowa. That was a powerful moment for me. My first match at the Sportatorium, that was a very powerful moment. To wrestle, to just become a wrestler in 1994 and 95, before the internet was a thing, from Muscatine, Iowa. Like, there's no one in Muscatine that's a pro wrestler. How do you become a pro wrestler? There's no books at the library to tell you how to be a pro wrestler. My guidance counselor couldn't tell me how to be a pro wrestler. Just having that match. And then in the arena of the Sportatorium, where Ric Flair wrestled, and Bruiser Brody, and the Von Erichs, and Mil Máscaras, and Harley Race, that was awesome. Wrestling at Mercado has been incredible. Having great photos taken, seeing again that body of work where you're at this historic Mexican-American neighborhood, this barrio, and you're putting on lucha libre for the first time there and seeing the kids' reaction. That's super cool, you know, and just showing up in shape, showing up ready to work and to put in a good performance. So, you know, one powerful moment, it's hard for me to really point any out. Just meeting my childhood hero, Tommy Wildfire Rich, was super cool. And that was at the Beer Stube in Moline, you know, he just showed up there unannounced. And for me to meet, I mean, it was like meeting the Lone Ranger. It was like meeting Luke Skywalker, except he was a real person, you know, he wasn't an actor. He was Tommy Wildfire Rich. So I've had a lot of powerful moments as a luchador in a pro wrestling. One of the biggest challenges as a Latino, you know, sometimes it comes from our own community. Growing up, I was born in 1973. I would always hear some of the elders in my community kind of criticize my Spanish, you know, and make me embarrassed about my Spanish and that I didn't speak it that well. You know, you should speak Spanish. Hey, habla en español. And that just made me speak less Spanish, you know, to hear that criticism. And what was weird is when that changed, when I kind of turned that around, was my friend and I, Miguel Salcedo, we decided to go to Eagle Pass to vacation. And we had the idea to go to Zihuatanejo, Mexico, to go to Zihuatanejo, because I had seen the movie Shawshank Redemption, where it ends and they go to the beach there and they meet. And I was like, man, Miguel, we should go to Zihuatanejo. And, you know, we were like 28 years old, 27. We had a little money and time. And so we were going to do that. And when we stayed in Eagle Pass for a couple of days, I told my relatives we were going to go to Mexico. And they're like, you're going to go beyond Piedras Negras? And I said, yeah. They're like, your Spanish is terrible. You're not from even here. Like, you're from Iowa. We don't drive into Mexico. We just go to Piedras and we buy some Coca-Cola, go to Mercado, have some tacos and come back. You're crazy, you know? But we went ahead and did it, even though we were kind of nervous and scared about it. And we went to Monterrey. We drove across the border. Then we went to Gomez Palacio, Saltillo, Durango. We spent the night there. And then the next day, we drove all day across these mountains and went to Mazatlan. And we said, forget Zihuatanejo. That was the most beautiful place we'd ever seen, was Mazatlan. And I began to talk Spanish there because I wanted to participate and talk to the people in the Mercado or visit with folks from the hotel and tourists from other parts of Mexico. And I was like, even though my Spanish isn't perfect, I'm going to speak it. And what was amazing, here I was in Mexico, and the Mexicanos were telling me, your Spanish is pretty good. And I was like, what? I said, I've heard my whole life my Spanish is terrible. And they're like, well, you're not from Mexico. You're from Iowa. We don't even know where that's at. You know, of course you don't speak great Spanish. And that encouraged me. I was like, holy cow, these Mexicanos here are making me feel at home. They almost like took me in like this lost son everywhere we went and made us feel just a lot of love and pride for that country. And it was a beautiful country. So at that point forward, then I just like, I'm going to speak Spanish, and it might not be perfect, you know, but I'm going to speak it, and I'll keep going and improving on that. So that was one thing that changed there. That was an obstacle, but now I'm like, hey, I'm going to speak Spanish. I'm going to speak Spanish at work. And if there's a room full of people that they're like, man, those guys are talking, yeah, we're talking Spanish. So I'm going to keep doing it. So nothing's going to change. So, you know, I think the way Latinos, especially young people, can embrace their identity of being Hispanic and Latino is just understand it's an advantage, you know, to be able to know two cultures and to know two countries, two different communities, to speak two languages, even if maybe your Spanish isn't perfect, but you can understand it, to be around it, it's an advantage, you know, and you get to learn different things about our culture. So embrace that. I know I was fortunate because in pro wrestling, being Hispanic, even when I went to wrestling school, people were like, my trainer, Skandar Akbar, was like, you look like a Guerrero. And, you know, like the famous Guerrero family, Gordy Guerrero and his sons, you know, Hector, Mando, and Chavo, and Eddie, of course. He says, you look like a Guerrero. So in wrestling, there had always been the ethnic star where, hey, if you were Italian in New York, you were going to get more opportunities because they wanted those fans to come to the shows. And Mil Máscaras and Tito Santana and other wrestlers also embraced that and spoke a little Spanish. So I always took that in pro wrestling to use that, my identity. Even when I wrestled without a mask, I was still Latin Thunder Juan Fourneau, and I had the Mexican flag, and I would talk in Spanish a little bit. It's an advantage. And learn from other cultures too. If I get a chance to see another Latino like a Cuban, we don't get the opportunities to interact with a lot of Cuban Americans, but we can learn a lot from their culture, right? The Jewish culture, the Cuban culture, they know a lot about finances that we don't understand. Take advantage, learn from that. But yeah, embrace being a Latino, embrace being an Iowan and a Midwesterner too, you know? One thing that is a little bit off subject, but when I had always thought of myself as first a Mexican American, like the lens I looked at the world. You know, you're a dad, you're a male, you're a guy, you're a blue collar, whatever it is. There's lenses we look at through our life, and I had always looked at myself as Mexican American was the biggest lens I saw myself as, that filter. And then when my dad passed away, and they had his funeral, we had a little room where at the funeral home they said, hey, this room is just for you and your family. When you need a break to grieve, to have a moment of privacy, you can come here. And we appreciated that, and we were using that during the services. And then there was a moment where like they had a coffee pot in there, and some Latinos some Hispanics saw that, and they went in there and started drinking coffee and talking and platicando. And next thing you know, the room was full of people. And I was like uncomfortable, because I was like, this is supposed to be just for our family. We're grieving here. This is my dad, you know? And they didn't mean any harm by it. But I was like, that moment was like, maybe I'm an Iowan. Maybe I'm a Midwesterner. Because, right, we're private when we're grieving. We're private during those moments. We want some time where it's just us and our family. The Latinos there, they didn't mean any harm by it. They loved my dad. They cared about him. Some of them knew him well. Some of them didn't. And I was like, what are you guys doing in this room? Especially the ones that didn't know him. That was the Iowan in me. That was the Midwesterner in me. So the lens you see the world through, it changes, right? I mean, maybe being an Iowan is even more powerful for me than being a Mexican American. And that was surprising. You know, when I look at today's youth, unlike a lot of people my age, I see a lot of hope. I think it's a bright future. I love being around young people, and I love being around young Latinos. When 2014, I self-published my own book, and it was my memoirs of how I became a pro wrestler. So one of the things my wife and I decided to do, T and I went to East LA to a book festival that Edward James Olmos put together. So Edward James Olmos is a great filmmaker, an actor, and a hero of mine. So I wanted to go for the festival to sell a few books and just to go to East LA, because that's an iconic Mexican neighborhood. You see it in cinema and movies. They talk about it in pop culture. And when we went there, it was cool to talk to a lot of residents and people who'd grown up there. And I was talking to a guy that was about my age, and he's like, well, where are you from? And I'm like, well, I'm from Iowa. And he's like, man, there's Mexicanos in Iowa? I didn't know that. And I was like, yeah, there's actually a lot. And he says, well, what do you think of East LA? And I was like, well, to be honest with you, I thought I was going to be a little rougher, you know, because like everything was like super clean, and the schools were great, and the kids were fantastic, and it didn't seem dangerous at all. And there was a lot of vibrant neighborhoods and small businesses that seemed to be thriving. I said, I guess I just thought it was going to be a little rougher. He says, well, there's still little pockets of that, especially at night, he said, but this is the East LA that our parents dreamed of for us. And when I look at the youth of today, like my nephew Sebastian, who's part of LULAC and works for the QC Chamber of Commerce, or when I go shopping in Hy-Vee and Muscatine, and Moises Calderon is the store manager. He's not the employee. That wasn't his first job. No, this guy is a young Latino who speaks English and Spanish with deep roots in our community. His family has ran El Olmito for generations. He's the store manager. El mero mero, right? El jefe. That is cool to see. So I'm inspired by that, because that shows you when someone can be the store manager of a brand like Hy-Vee that's Iowan, that's Midwesterner, that employs a lot of people, to be in charge of that. I think that's cool. So I'm inspired to see the young people in our community. I think what they're doing is pretty cool, and I think the future's bright. If you're from a small town here in Iowa in the Midwest, and you got dreams, big dreams, you know, I guess the the biggest piece of advice is have patience. It's going to take a while. Don't think that journey is going to be short. And Edward James Olmos, I talked a little bit about him being one of my heroes. I heard him speak at Palmer Auditorium. He came to Davenport years ago. I went with my brother Ismael, and he had this quote. They asked him, "Hey, what's the secret to your success?" And it's still the greatest piece of advice I ever got. He said, "Have the discipline to do what you love to do when you don't want to do it." So no matter what it is that you want to do, you want to be a great lawyer, you want to be a great businessman, you want to be a great welder, or you want to be a great luchador or pro wrestler, an artist. There's going to be days you don't feel like doing it. Have the discipline to do what you love to do when you don't want to do it. I love working out. People give me credit for being in shape and, wow, you're in pretty good shape for your age. Hey, here's a little secret. It's easy for me because I love it. I've always loved going to the gym. But even I try to work out 4 days a week. There's still usually 1 day a week I don't really feel like going. So you have to have the discipline to do what you love to do when you don't want to do it. And just get in there. And once you've started, usually it turns out you have a great workout, or you have a great session as a photographer or an artist, or you learn something when you're studying. So that's my piece of advice. Legacy, what does that mean to me? I keep thinking of Mike Tyson saying legacy. He's not sure what that word means. I'm not sure either. Legacy is interesting because if you talk to 99% of the people in Muscatine, they don't think about Roy Carver and what he did for our community. They don't think about the Musser family or the Stanley family, the families who've given a lot to Muscatine and left a legacy with a library or our beautiful soccer fields or our great baseball fields. Bob Ontiveros in Moline, he has a wonderful legacy, but I don't know, when people go to Mercado, and it's like thousands of people go, do they realize that started with Bob? That is his legacy, but I don't know how many people remember that. But I do think there are some people who think of that or remember. I was just this young Hispanic kid who loved to read, wanted to learn, and needed a safe place to go for entertainment, to learn. And I would go to the library all the time. I would walk down to the Musser Public Library, and I picked out all kinds of books. I read about finances and money, leadership. Some of my heroes like Martin Luther King or Cesar Chavez, I would read biographies and stuff. I loved the library. I've never met the Musser family. I don't know who they are, but through their generosity, their giving, they gave a Hispanic kid they never even met all kinds of opportunities, So I try to do a little bit of a legacy to just be generous. And I'm a late bloomer. I was not really that. You met me when I was in my early 20s. I wasn't that impressive of a person. I was kind of selfish and I wasn't generous. And I wasn't really that kind to people either. As I've gotten older, thankfully, I've learned some of those things and appreciate just being nice to people and helping young people out when they need a little bit of help, some advice. I try to be nice to the young wrestlers because I remember what it was like. I remember going to wrestle in Emporia, Kansas, and it was a long drive, and we got paid $50. It was all ate up with gas, of course. But the promoter there, he would come up to me after the show, after he paid me the $50, and he'd say, "Hey, Juan, you know what? I really like you, and you had a great match tonight. Here's a free hotel room." He had swimming pools that he would clean, and he would get free hotel rooms at all these different places we would wrestle at. That was his business, and he would give me a free hotel room just because I showed up. And I was in shape and I tried hard. I had a good attitude. I was sober. He saw that I really wanted this and I was respectful. And as a young person, you might not realize that, but as you get older, you realize we're all watching, right? There's someone watching you. And if you are respectful and you are working hard and you're trying, people will try to help you out. So I try to do that. That's one of the legacies I try to do, is just be generous and help people out in whatever ways I can. If I was talking to that young 21-year-old kid who was going to Dallas, Texas to train to be a pro wrestler, I would tell him to move to Dallas, Texas for that period of time. I'm really proud of that 21-year-old guy, that young man who had that bold move, that courage to say, I'm going to go to wrestling school in Dallas, Texas. But there was still a little bit of fear in me because I got a job at a Hardee's, because I worked at Hardee's. That's where I had worked as a teenager and I had experience there. So there was a Hardee's outside of Austin in Round Rock where I would drive by on I-35, and I saw that that was there, and I was comfortable with that. So I got a job there, and then I got an apartment in a town, Georgetown, not far away from there, which was a town that reminded me a lot of Muscatine. It was about 20,000, 25,000 people, and it was pretty safe, and it was pretty quiet. So I would drive to wrestling school every week and train, but I didn't put myself in a position to work. You know, that's the advice I would get, is like, it's not just about working hard. You have to put yourself in a position to work hard. So if I had been in Dallas and got over that fear of being in a really big city, because I was afraid. I was from Muscatine. I was afraid of the big city. It was really something scary for me. Everything about it, the traffic, the size, and everything about it, the big buildings. If I had made that move and just had a little bit more courage, I would have been able to go to the wrestling school more often. I would have been able to go there 2 to 3 times a week. I would have been able to go to the matches every week at the Sportatorium, watch the matches, learn, network, meet other wrestlers, because they were helping me out. They were nice to me. They saw how much I wanted it. But because I was only going to wrestling school once a week, I didn't really get as much success out of that as I could have. So put yourself in a position where you can work. And that means being strategic and really thinking about what's the best move for me. It'd be like an actor going to California and saying, I want to be an actor, but they move to San Francisco or San Diego. No, you need to be in Hollywood. That's where the action's at. So for that period of time in my formative years, I wish I would have been just a little bit more bolder. That would be the advice I would give that young man. My proudest moment, my proudest achievement, and I know it's cliche, is just being a dad, being a father, and meeting my wife, Tia, and her helping me become a better husband and giving me the gift of being a dad to Arabella and Alex. That's my proudest moment, you know, because being Latin Thunder is cool and it's fun to perform and wrestle in front of an audience. To get paid to do something you love is amazing. But being a father has taught me so much, and having my wife create a home for us, you know, turning this house into a home full of love, and it just means a lot. That's a much deeper meaning, I think, than even my Latin Thunder. I'm proud of being that. I'm proud of the work I've done. But that's been my proudest moment, just being a dad. You learn so much from being a dad. You learn about patience, and you learn about wisdom, and also that, hey, I was one of those people that when I look back, you know, I had periods of my life where I was trying to pursue wrestling and I was single. So here I was, I had a good job and I was single with no kids. You would think that's when I would have a lot of success and I'd be doing really well. But it wasn't. It wasn't till I was married and I had both my kids that I could really focus on being Latin Thunder and doing other things in my life. I bought real estate. I've had success with my job. Like, once my personal life was settled and I knew I had someone who loved me and I had a home and I had 2 kids that I had to provide for, it gave me focus. And that helped make Latin Thunder an even bigger star, and it created more opportunities for me. Other people might do better. That's fine. If they're sitting there single without kids, oh, I can work more, I can put in more hours. But for me, that focus helped me out a lot. To be a father, have to be responsible, and having my personal life settled was wonderful for me. Probably the hardest times I had in my life was I had bought a coffee shop. I was trying to be a small business owner. So I had some real estate, I had my job, and Arabella had been born, and my wife and I were together, and I bought a coffee shop, and I thought that would be a good business, and it turned out to be a tough business. It was a failed business, and we lost money at it. And it was painful because we were, you know, my wife Tia was expecting with our son Alex, and she started to have some difficulties at the end of the pregnancy. She had kidney stones, and he had to be delivered a month early. So he was a little bit premature. And I needed money, and the coffee shop was draining money from us. And I had to sell some stock out of my 401k to just pay the bills, to buy groceries, to pay for the lights and the gas. So it was really hard, and it was painful financially as well. But what it taught me was, I think I was going to take an L. I was going to lose at some point. You know, that happens in life. You don't always win. You don't bat 1,000. And I kept, when we closed the coffee shop and my finances were in shambles, to be honest, I kept telling myself, hey, I have my health. I still have my job. My son's fine. He's healthy. My wife's fine. She's healthy. I still have my family, my job, my health. I'll be fine. This is okay. And I dealt with it. Because when you look at that, I still feel like I've had a charmed life. My sister, Marisabel, and my cuñado Beto, they had a child and they lost him, Rogelio. He was less than 2 years old, my nephew. And my nephew, Sebastian, their other son, has had cancer. They've had a tough life. They've had struggles, but they've been able to maintain their marriage. They still have a great family. They've had 5 wonderful boys. So you look around, you see other people, the struggles they have. What I went through was pretty minor, and it wasn't that difficult. I still had my health, I still had my family, I had my job, and with time it all improved and got better. So that was the toughest times I had in my life. Bright, again, I might be a little bit, most people in their 50s would look at the future and not think it's very bright. We go through tough times, but when I did study, when I actually did pay attention in high school in class, and I would pick up books at the library, it was history books. And I considered being a history teacher when I was younger. So I've read a lot of history and studied a lot of history. This country's gone through bad times and tough times before and challenges, and that's just how things are. But I look at this generation of young people, and especially the Latinos, but all the young folks, and there's a lot of young folks who are doing great things. And they're some of the most loving people, accepting people, young folks are. They're not hung up on some of the things I saw other generations be hung up on. So to me, the future's bright, and I'm looking forward to just continuing to contribute and do more things. Well, Generaciones means to me like the folks in our community who've been here before. There's a lot of families. The Fourneau family's been here a long time. The Lessa family, the Valenzuela family, the Cadena family, the Salcedo family. That's the families who came here in the 60s and 70s. And I appreciate what they did because they worked very hard to make our community great. And one thing I think about, one of my friends I graduated high school with in 1991 was Manuel Cadena. And Manny passed away when he was 23. He went to MIT, the greatest engineering school in the world, on scholarship. He was a great academic student. He was also a great artist. He was the lead our senior year in the play Grease. So he was a musician, he was an artist, and a great scholar. And, he passed away young. And his mom and dad were Juan and Marta Cadena. He would have done amazing things in his life. So as I've gotten a little bit older, I just appreciate having these years, because if you'd have met me when I was 23, I was no Manuel Cadena. I was not. He was so kind, he was hardworking, he was so smart, so disciplined, and he had so much to offer. And I'm 52. I've been able to work on myself to become a better person. Not everyone gets that privilege. Not everyone gets that opportunity, And this country, our state, our community would have been so much better off if Manuel was still alive. But just to try to honor a little bit of the Cadena family and my family and the other families who paved the way here, I try to just be more generous, more wise, and work harder, try to become a better person and kinder. And again, I try to be that bridge from that generation. Because when I talk to young Latinos here in Muscatine, some of them are from Guatemala, Honduras. They're directly from Mexico City, not La Frontera, not Del Rio or Acuña or Brownsville. They're from other parts of Mexico. So it's a much more diverse and vibrant community. A lot of them don't know about Gloria Casas or my first grade teacher, Coca Page. She was such an advocate for our family, and she started the first bilingual program in Muscatine. I'm a product of the bilingual program in Muscatine. In kindergarten, in 1978, I was getting taught in English and Spanish. So I remember those names, and I try to bring them up so that people can honor and remember them, because a lot of them don't know them. And it isn't because they're mean, they just don't know. So it's kind of my job to let them know some of the folks who came before them. And, I went to my daughter Arabella's orchestra concert, and it made me think of that guy from East LA that said, this is the community that we dreamed of, that our parents dreamed for us. Because here was Mr. Najarro, this guy who spoke English and Spanish, leading the orchestra. And this wasn't soccer or baseball. This was arts. And so many of the students who were there were Latinos and Hispanics. And it warmed my heart. And I thought, this is the Muscatine that Juan and Marta Cadena dreamed of, that Coca Page dreamed of, that my parents dreamed of. So that's what I try to think about. That last one's blank, Antonio, because I don't know how I'm going to answer it. 20 years from now, I hope I'm still here. And I hope that people look at me like they do Mike. When I see him in Davenport, a longtime member of LULAC, or I see some of the elders in our community who I know have done a lot. I hope, OG, whatever you want to call it, I hope I'm still here and I'm 72 years old and I'm still contributing. I hope I'm still being generous. I hope I have, like Bob Ontiveros, I won't have anything like those funds, but I hope I'm spending a little bit of my money being generous, funding projects, funding artists, funding things in our community. I hope that I'm still contributing. For whatever reason, I've always been like one of these folks that thinks about like my mom and my dad. And my mom's side of the family, my mom is 82 and is still good health. Her mother lived to be 95. Her grandmother lived to be 99. My tío, her older brother, is 85, and he's still a practicing attorney in Eagle Pass, Texas. So there's a chance, nothing's guaranteed, that I might have a long life. And that's one of the reasons I quit wrestling, was those blows to the head, were gonna cause problems later in life. And I hope to have a long life. I hope to be using this mind. And I hope when I wake up and I'm 72 years old, I still have a to-do list, things I want to get done, dreams I still have. And they're not going to be with my body. It's not going to be with drop kicks. It's not going to be with huracanranas or tijeras or lucha libre. It's not going to be as an athlete. And these muscles that I still am able to maintain a little bit at 52, they'll be gone. That's just how life is. So I need to be using my mind, my creativity, and hopefully a little bit more wisdom and some of my resources to help my community.